Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome CNN host and your Global Action Summit moderator, Fareed Zakaria.
It is such a pleasure to be back. We have a very interesting program here. I'm here with Thomas Gass, one of the most important people at the UN, who is involved in really all of the UN's efforts on the subjects we are discussing. But we have an even more senior person with which we are going to start our conversation. The Secretary General of the United Nations was planning to be here, but his schedule did not allow it. And so, thanks to the age of technology, we have an opening message from him. Can we roll that tape?
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 2015 Global Action Summit. I thank Fareed Zakaria, the moderator, and Chairman Scott Massey for the chance to join you by video. The Sustainable Development Goals can realize our vision to end poverty and create peaceful societies on a healthy planet. That vision emerged from the most inclusive global consultation process in the history of the United Nations, involving governments, activists, businesses, and millions of concerned citizens across the world. Now, we need all of these partners to remain united and to rally behind the goals as we embark on the crucial work of translating them into tangible improvements in the lives of people everywhere. I thank the participants in this summit for working on sustainable solutions for food, health, and prosperity. You have achieved great progress so far through the Global Action Forum. Now is the moment to become even more engaged. I have been asked to name the key reason that countries made such remarkable progress towards the Millennium Development Goals. The answer is solidarity. Solidarity means national action matched by international support. When we activate a strong spirit of solidarity, we secure our common future. Thank you.
I don't know how many of you watched the Colbert Show, the new Late Show with Stephen Colbert, which the Secretary General appeared on that show and drank martinis with Stephen Colbert at the eve of the UN General Assembly. It was a less substantive presentation than you witnessed here. So again, we have to thank Scott Massey for being able to get the Secretary General not to just engage in trivia, but a substantive conversation. Thomas, as I said, is a key leader at the UN, but I think it's really important. He and I have worked together on some stuff at Davos as well, and he is refreshingly unencumbered by UN bureaucracy and somebody who really tries to get things done and does get an enormous amount done. But I want to highlight for you that these issues are very real for him. He has spent time in Nepal, years and years in Nepal. So development for him is not simply an abstraction that he is working on while he is at the United Nations, but something that he has really lived and breathed for years and years in one of the poorest and most disadvantaged countries in the world. Let me ask you, Thomas, the first thing, let's start with the good news, which is that the Millennium Development Goals, the key goal, which was having the number of people in extreme poverty defined as $1.25 a day, was achieved 5 years ahead of schedule. So instead of 15 years, it was done in 10 years. Now you've put out an even more ambitious plan, which is to eliminate it by 2030. And what I wonder is this realistic? And I'll tell you what my thought is. Not so much that you will not be able to achieve it because there are kind of a lack of will on your part or anything like that. I wonder if you've gotten the low-hanging fruit, the easier stuff to do, which has frankly been China and India and places like that, and there will be some movement there. But you remember Paul Collier's book, The Bottom Billion, that you're now getting to the bottom billion, that is the people who are living in extreme poverty because they live under extremely dysfunctional and corrupt regimes. How will you manage to pull this off?
Well, thank you for an easy question to start with. I think that it's precisely because that bottom billion counts that this whole process came into being, and that's why we needed to move from the Millennium Development Goals to something more radical, if you want. And when I say we, I don't mean we, the technicians or the technocrats at the UN. I actually mean the member states. I mean 193 member states of the United Nations. I mean civil society, the private sector, thousands of interest groups. Over 5 million individuals were interviewed and surveyed and came up with this shared vision of humanity that as a first, that has 17 goals, that has 169 targets, and the first target is to eradicate extreme poverty by 2030, because precisely we want to go one step further, we as a humanity. Now, you're right, the Millennium Development Goals were achieved to a large extent because of the rapid growth of China, India, Latin America also. And we will need to find new ways. We will have to approach this new challenge differently. Economic growth is still important, but many more actions, many more activities will have to be engaged in order to reach that bottom billion.
And how do you think are there mechanisms, or is there a shaming process, or is there a peer pressure, best practices? You know, you look at a country like Haiti, which is part of that bottom billion. You look at some countries in Africa, without naming them, which are part of it. You know, the governance really is lacking. And so it's not just a question of saying, well, the government needs to adopt better policies. In a sense, the problem in these countries is not the kind of government, but the degree of government, that there really is very little government. And is there an outside solution to that problem?
I think in the UN we have come to realize over 70 years of our history that you can't really change things from outside. And that if you really want this new agenda for sustainable development to move forward, you have to turn this shared vision of humanity into a new social contract between the leaders and the people. And I think that is one of the two biggest changes between the Millennium Development Goals and the Sustainable Development Goals. The accountability shifts. You see, when we were implementing the Millennium Development Goals, it was very much about that relationship between donors and recipients, between developed countries and developing countries, between the North and the South. Here, there is a very clear emphasis that the accountability, the implementation, the leadership, the ownership has to be at a national level. That is a challenge in itself, but it will be crucial because it means that these sustainable development goals need to be discussed, need to become part of a national policy, a national political dialogue in Haiti, in countries in Africa, but also in the US and in Germany. And that is beginning to happen, and I feel that a conference such as this one is part of that, is a very crucial part of that.
So you pointed out that there are 17 goals and 169 targets. There are people who say that's 160 too many, that, you know, when you have so many targets, when you have so many goals, frankly, you're going to dissipate the focus. You're going to, you know, you're not going to have the ability to really achieve the 4 or 5 that should be the key metrics that you look at.
The Millennium Development Goals were much more focused, but the Millennium Development Goals were a strategic plan to address the most important issues in developing countries. Here, as a result of this coming together, and you heard the Secretary General say that it was unprecedented, this opening up of the UN to external voices, this shared vision of humanity is more complex. It's not a strategic plan. And for people like me who have log frames in their DNA, this is a tough thing to accept, that the Sustainable Development Goals are not just a miracle solution that can be applied in a cookie-cutter approach across developing countries and North. No, this is an agenda that addresses the complexity of the human challenges, the complexity of the interaction between natural resources, between the planet, between the economics, between the social issues.
Give me a sense of the difference between the Millennium Development Goals and the Sustainable Goals. You know, highlight, illustrate that with an example.
Well, you have a much stronger emphasis, of course, on climate change. You have an emphasis on building resilience in cities. You have an emphasis on making available energy, sustainable energy for all, and better access to water and sanitation. But probably the big, let's say, revolutionary paragraphs in these SDGs are, on the one hand, the recognition that inequalities leads to injustice. And so you have a goal number 10, that is all about reducing inequalities. You have a goal number 16 that is about peaceful societies, about access to justice, about reducing corruption, about better governance, a legal identity for everyone. These are new elements, but probably the most important, and I would say that is redefining sustainable development. And if anyone has written a book on sustainable development, sorry, but there's something new coming here, namely the understanding that if a significant economic or social group is left behind, our development is not sustainable. That was not part of our definition of sustainable development. And that was not part of the Millennium Development Goals. You see, going forward, we will not be able to hide behind averages anymore. It's going to be about that bottom billion, wherever it is distributed. Now, that may sound like rhetoric, but it isn't. As you said, I'm a development cooperation practitioner, and we would typically go for the low-hanging fruit. We would typically go for maximum impact. And then sooner or later, the growth, the economic growth, the progress would trickle down to the vulnerable groups. But this approach, this new agenda, the Sustainable Development Goals, compel us to begin by understanding who are the most vulnerable in our cities, in our communities, in our cooperation, and to understand why these vulnerable groups are vulnerable, understanding the kind of risks, the economic, the social, the environmental, the political risks that they face, and then addressing those risks as part of our strategy. That is a very revolutionary approach to development, and not just in developing countries. It is also something that, if it is taken seriously, I believe, will change the way policies are made in developed countries.
When you were in Nepal, you told me that you saw firsthand how unequal economic growth was, and that was almost the geography of Nepal that determined whether you were effectively a lucky beneficiary or not, whether you were, in a valley that was cut off from resources. Those are the kind of inequalities I think we don't think a lot about, where the inequalities are not generated by lack of skills or you're not working hard enough, but they are almost built into the economy.
Exactly, and I mean that's why I'm so passionate about this agenda. After having worked for 4 years in Nepal, having seen this, you may have the next village maybe only a few hundred meters away, in a straight line, but there is a valley with a raging river in between, and that valley is about 1,500 meters deep. Over those years, there were built a lot of trail bridges, and it is incredible how that little piece of infrastructure can bring a health post nearer, can bring a school nearer, can be a district office where you can register to vote. So infrastructure is linked to civil empowerment. Yeah. Infrastructure is linked to survival. This morning you started with a session about data. But if you live in a remote place where there is no data and where nobody cares really what happens, then you don't exist for the Internet of Things, you don't exist for the statistics at the UN, and your life doesn't change. Yeah. And you may not even have a legal identity, so you cannot inherit things. Your driver's license, not that you need a driver's license in those valleys, but your school certificate, nothing is valid, because as a person you don't exist in an official world.
I think about your example of Nepal, and I think about a book I read that talked about the natural advantages that the United States has had in building this extraordinary economy. We all tend to think in America it's because we're all geniuses and we're capitalists and we're entrepreneurs, and of course there's truth to that. Here's a simple natural advantage that people don't think about. So throughout human history, it's been much easier to transport goods by water than by land. It's still about 10 times cheaper to transport goods by water, which is why most civilizations have been built along rivers, navigable rivers. The United States has more navigable rivers, more navigable waterways than the rest of the world put together. The United States has about 15,000 miles of navigable waterways. China has 2,000. Germany has 2,000. The entire Middle East, by the way, has 120 miles of navigable waterway. So you have this extraordinary natural advantage, and then you look at Africa where you see these beautiful photographs, and if you've been, you've seen these incredibly dramatic scenes of waterfalls and these amazing torrential rivers, right? Great for photography, terrible for commerce. None of them are navigable. A waterfall, by definition, is a non-navigable river, right? And so you have these inbuilt and inherent inequalities, even at a global scale. Let me ask you about one more challenge you face, which is some of these goals that you talk about in the new set are goals that require changes in human behavior. They're about malnutrition. They're about healthier living. And this is sort of one of the things we've been talking about, right? Those are very different from telling a government, change your fiscal policy, change your monetary policy, change even your growth strategy. Here you're trying to reach in and change individual human behavior. How much of a challenge is that? Is there any evidence that it can work?
I think that over the years of development cooperation, we've realized how difficult it is to solve issues just by throwing money at it. You need to involve the population. The people whose lives need to change, need to be part of the solution, need to be part of the design of the solution. And that's why in these sustainable development goals, this emphasis on the accountability, the shift of the accountability from a global, let's say, country-to-country level to a national level is so important. And it's something that we have to work on. It's not just going to happen. But at the same time, these sustainable development goals emphasize the integration of economic, social, and environmental dimensions, which just explains why these issues are never simple. You need to make, I mean, even I was talking about trail bridges just now. Trail bridge sounds like a pretty straightforward technical thing that you can add there between, you know, two sides of a valley. But the trail bridge needs to be maintained. It needs to be checked. It needs to be, there are many issues around the trail bridge. I mean, I can give you a very concrete example. People don't have toilets in the village. So they go over the trail bridge and they urinate against rocks around on the other side of the trail bridge that corrodes the cables. So the community, in order to discourage the people from doing that, they put an icon of a god there. It sounds funny, but it's something that would induce respect for this investment that the community has done. But then women who are pregnant or who have their period can no longer cross the river. You see? So it's never just about an infrastructure. It's always about how the infrastructure, the investment integrates with the society. And in order to do that, you have to be there. You have to understand what's happening. You have to interface with that local population. And even the people in the cities, the governments, the authorities often don't understand some of the complexities of change at the local level. So the only way these sustainable development goals are going to be achieved is if we really break them down and bring them down to local authorities, create dialogue at the local level, whether it's in Nashville, whether it's in a remote valley in Nepal, it's the same. But we need to get it to that level of discussion.
So I was reading the New York Times today, and they had an article there about African debt levels, pointing out that, you remember there was all that, those movements to reduce or forgive African debt. Bono was the most famous celebrity associated with it. It was a huge, really global movement, and it largely succeeded. Well, guess what? Many African countries are approaching debt levels about what they were during that period, because since then what happened is the cost of capital collapsed. Many of these countries borrowed enormous amounts of money, and here's the biggest problem: growth has now slowed because commodity prices have plunged. And so I guess the more general question would be, the Millennium Development Goals were achieved during a period when there was pretty robust global growth. It may have been built on credit that ultimately unwound, but during the 2002 to 2007-8 period, there was an extraordinary burst of growth, particularly the emerging markets, which were growing at 4 times the developed countries. You're probably looking at a period of slower growth going forward. Does that mean you have to adjust the time frame? And particularly, I look at Africa and look at these debt levels. Are we going to have to do another great debt forgiveness program?
I wouldn't say that we have to adapt the timeline. The timeline has just been set a month ago, and so maybe moving forward. But what is important, and maybe we will need new debt relief programs. What is important, though, is to be much more creative about promoting investment at the national level, making sure also that there is no race to the bottom in terms of the fiscal conditions that foreign companies are working in these developing countries. Frequently, even though the growth happened, it didn't really bring about any fiscal revenue at the national level, because companies were able to shift their profits. So we need to have better conditions, more predictable conditions for investment, better governance, which is also an important element of these sustainable development goals. And we need to make sure that this growth is more inclusive. Hence that goal that deals with inequality, and that picks up, by the way, one of the World Bank's goals about monitoring the bottom 40% and trying to ensure that their income growth becomes higher than the national average. But that's not enough. You also need to make sure that policies lead to more inclusion, economic, social, political inclusion of marginalized groups. You need to put in place fiscal, wage, social policies that actually provide that kind of support, that kind of redistribution of wealth.
How does, for this audience, how does health, nutrition, food play into these goals?
They're critical, and that's why they are respectively the goal 2 and the goal 3, or the other way around. Goal 2 is on food and nutrition, and goal 3 on health, goal 4 on education. These 3 elements
You're sure you didn't get them from Scott?
Sorry?
Because you're sure you didn't crib these from Scott Massey, right? Because
I actually, when I prepared for this conference and I read last year's report, I thought, wow, this is exactly what came up. And not just the fact that you have education and health, but that you have education including quality of education, and education including vocational training, that you have health not just in terms of mortality, under 5 mortality, but that you have also, besides the big epidemics of HIV and tuberculosis and hepatitis, that you have, and malaria, of course, that you also have non-communicable diseases, that you have the dealing with road accidents, that you have this dealing with substance abuse. So a much more holistic approach to health, to education, to nutrition, and that those are totally interrelated.
Do you think that governments are getting more serious on the nutrition front? I mean, as you know, in the United States, we still face a lot of pushback whenever there is an effort to do this. Michelle Obama has been pushing this idea, yes. And every month you read about the fact that, the school children are throwing the food in the garbage and things like that, which I think every parent knows this is a balance, a trade-off. You're trying to get them to eat the good stuff, but at the end of the day, they do have to actually ingest something. And so how do you're dealing with this on a global level, I deal with it in my kitchen.
I think we like to be in denial about the limitation of the natural resources that we have. So it's not just about what we take into our bodies and makes our bodies sick. It's also how much and how sustainably we produce that food. And I know that is one of the important elements of the discussions here in this summit. It's about, and not just about food, it's about the value chains generally, the clothing that we wear, the products that we use, the cars that we use, and how the whole value chain works together, how much energy we waste. I believe that we are coming to a time where we have, as a humanity, we have to face the limitation of our natural resources. And if we don't accept it, the reality is just going to catch up with us more and more. And that reality can catch up with us either directly, because we have a whole half of the country that's dry for most of the year, and all of a sudden production cannot keep up. And after having stopped our sprinklers, we're all of a sudden getting messages that we need to shower less, and so it starts to touch our bodies, not just the lawns, but beyond that, these issues of sustainability are going to come and haunt us in other ways. And right now, the Secretary General spoke to us through a message, because this morning he's in the Security Council on a conference on security, development, and violent conflict. And one of the messages he's bringing there is the one about the importance of addressing the root causes. The root causes of most of the violent conflicts are related to, of course, to the frustration, the alienation of young people who don't have work, but also the limitation of natural resources, this injustice that you spoke about just now, about some countries have it all and others just don't have it, and they happen to be landlocked. And so even issues such as fuel, access become a big issue. This sense of dependency of one part of our society when the rest of the society is sprawling and is over-consuming and is wasting leads to a lot of frustration, which sooner or later will come to haunt us. And I believe that that's why this emphasis on leaving no one behind is so critical.
That's a wonderful note for us to close on. Thank you so much, Thomas.
Thank you, Fareed. Thanks.
Scott and Remy, if you can come up. Scott and Remy have an announcement to make, and we...
Thank you for a wonderful discussion. As there have been wonderful discussions all morning and throughout the day yesterday, as many of you know, the Global Action Platform has been involved from the outset, not only in convening wonderful events like this and connecting people with technology, communicating globally through our reports and live streaming, social media, but also with investing. Our Global Challenge Fund was created so that we were not simply talking about great ideas, but we were putting our money where our mouth is and making investments in research and in businesses that could have a transformative impact on food, health, and economic opportunity. Over the past year, we've had the pleasure to begin a series of conversations about collaborations with Aegis Health Security. And there are many opportunities to come in our ongoing discussions. But today, I'm very happy to have Remy Shakir, the managing partner of Aegis Health Security, to announce the fruition of one of those discussions, a very exciting development for our challenge funds. Remy?
Thank you, Scott, and thank you everybody for coming together. I think if we look at shared humanity and really putting all of our great ideas and resources to work to mobilize for impact, one of the things that Aegis Health Security is looking at is how to really bring together a network of capital, looking at social responsible investing, and being able to have market-driven initiatives aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals, and really be able to measure the impact, not at the national average level, but down at the hyper-community level. And in doing so, we, with Global Action Platform, are looking at a $500 million social responsible investing fund aligned with food, health, and prosperity, measuring against the Sustainable Development Goals, and being able to really showcase a call to action that is achieving results and being able to use funds and money that are not only returning investment to the investors and returns to the investors, but being able to improve our shared humanity.
Thank you very much. We're so excited about this and look forward to working with the United Nations, the UN Foundation, and others to solicit and identify some incredible technologies and business opportunities. And I think now we also have another comment from the Secretary General.
Ladies and gentlemen, congratulations to Aegis Analytics and the Global Action Platform for launching the $500 million Challenge Fund. Funds like this can help us reach the Sustainable Development Goals. So can investment and innovation. That is why we are mobilizing the creative energy of the private sector. We also value university business alliances like the Global Action Platform. Sustainable development demands responsible business practices that respect human rights and promote peace. I thank you for engaging on the global agenda, and I wish you continued success in your efforts to make a difference in leaving no one behind and building a future of dignity for all. Thank you.
And thank you all very much. I think there's meant to be a voice of God, but instead we have Scott.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. The track rooms will begin at 1:30.